Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the homestead. I think we have officially survived a really long, hot summer. We live southeast Texas, just north of Houston, and we have had weather, temperature over 100 degrees for most of the summer months, which is very unusual for us, and also just very dry. So it's been kind of a miserable summer, and I think we've finally made it through that. Fall is here. I'm enjoying the beautiful weather, so I'm going to get out here in my front garden today. This is my herb and flower garden, and I want to plant some garlic and some onions. I just bought these at a local farm and feed store, and I'm going to go ahead, and what I'm doing right now is just taking the bulbs of garlic apart into little garlic cloves. Each one of these cloves is going to be planted by itself, and when they mature and grow, each one is going to form into a full bulb. So hopefully lots of good garlic for me next year. I love garlic in my cooking. And also the onions, I just bought the little bulbs there. We'll plant those and we'll have some really good onions hopefully late spring. Now garlic takes a very long time to mature, so you plant it early fall. So we are at the beginning of October right now. So depending on your zone, we are in garden zone 9A, 8B, somewhere on the line there. So for us, I would be planting this somewhere at the end of September, beginning of October. But it's going to take until about the end of summer, middle to the end of next summer, for this to fully mature. So you want to grow this in an area where you know it's going to be undisturbed. Which brings me to my point. Why an herb garden? Well, growing herbs, obviously, because they cost an arm and a leg anymore, and because they're terrific and delicious. But specifically an herb garden, because some herbs, like garlic, if you want to call it an herb, take a long time to mature. So, you know, I wouldn't be able to grow this very well in my garden with other things where I'm constantly removing things and rotating them. But also, a lot of herbs become very invasive. So I have some beautiful mint that I've had in this garden for over a year now, and it's just taking over. And they will do that. So if you plant mint in a vegetable garden, it could very well take over your garden. So you want to kind of keep it contained. The other reason that I like having an herb garden is because a lot of my herbs, once I seed them and they mature and they're established, I don't ever have to worry about seeding them again. I have thyme that I seeded last year. I have a little thyme bush. It's a perennial. As long as I care for it and it gets watered and, you know, occasionally fertilized, it's just going to stay alive, and I'm just going to have fresh thyme. I don't need to keep reseeding that or replanting that every year. Same thing with oregano. I have some oregano that's actually growing in a container. Come back to that a little bit later. That I've planted in there 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago, and it's still doing great. So I haven't planted oregano in 2 years, and I have fresh oregano anytime I want it. There are also a lot of these herbs that will just reseed themselves. So right behind me here, you can probably kind of see it. This whole bed is full of cilantro. I seeded cilantro last year about this time, end of September, beginning of October. I seeded cilantro. It grew, did very well. I had fresh cilantro all through the winter, early spring, late spring. It matured, turned to bloom, turned to seed, which was great. I took that seed, and as it was coming off the cilantro, I collected some of it, but a lot of it I just scattered it right back into this garden bed, and it came up by itself. I didn't have to reseed it again. So a lot of those herbs are just going to mature and reseed themselves. Cilantro is fantastic about doing that. Basil is also good about doing that. So if you have a spot in your garden, or if you have an herb garden that you can fully dedicate to those herbs, it's a lot less work for you. You're not going to have to keep purposely reseeding those things. Dill will also reseed itself if you let it go to maturity and full seed. Parsley, I have a couple of parsley plants that are still alive from last year. So a lot of times parsley will it does great through the winters, and if you can keep it watered and keep it alive in the summertime, guys, I've had parsley. My mom used to tease me about it. It was a parsley tree almost. It grew. I mean, when I'm talking to you guys, it was a bush. The trunk of it was this big around. Same plant. It was like 2-3 years old, and I just had fresh parsley anytime I wanted to. So I love having an herb garden separate from my vegetable garden. Now I will seed some herbs in with my vegetables, especially, you know, basil is great with tomatoes, parsley is great with tomatoes. Those things actually are good for your garden plants, but I can't keep those from one year to the next. I can't really let the basil reseed itself, because at the end of the season I pull out all those tomato plants, and you know, I might till the ground. I'm using weed fabric in there. That bed is going to look completely different next year. So I might have some volunteer basil that happens to pop up wherever some of that seed scattered, but it's really not a good environment for an ongoing herb garden. This is my urban flower garden. So I have zinnias that I have growing in here. They're beautiful. And same thing with zinnias. When they come to full bloom and those seeds mature, I just scatter them in the garden and let them go again. And you know, this year's garden looked way prettier than last year's. Next year it'll probably look even prettier because it's maturing. I'm doing more of those things. So the mint is taking over more of the spot. I'm gonna be putting the oregano that I have in my containers. That's gonna be going out here in the garden because I'm gonna use those containers for something else. So, you know, mint, oregano, those beds are gonna be full of it. So after a couple of years, that's going to just be green, lush, full of wonderful herbs. And I'll have some zinnia flowers probably growing in the midst of all of that. Over in this bed, right now, I'm going to have garlic and onions, but I also have zinnias that have been scattering in here. So those will probably pop up too. So it's kind of just a beautiful, kind of wild looking garden. But also it's got all of these wonderful herbs that are growing undisturbed. So I'm not disturbing the soil for these herbs. They just reseed themselves. You know, like I said, I'll probably need to add some fertilizer to make sure that they're staying healthy and they're being well fed. But I also have a ton of mulch in here. So as that's decomposing, you know, worms will come up from the ground, they'll decompose it, they'll eat it, they turn that into worm manure, worm casings. So there's just a lot of good, healthy life that's going on in here, virtually undisturbed. Now I have to come and pull weeds every so often because, you know, you can't keep those from growing, but love my herb garden. You know, another fun herb that you can grow in your garden, and this is another one that you can just put it in there, pretty much forget it. I actually bought this, hope you can see that, organic ginger. I bought this at Costco and put it in my pantry and kind of forgot that I had it, and it's sprouted. Look at that. This is so much fun. So what I'm gonna do is take these ginger roots and put them in the ground and just let them grow, and they will grow and they will multiply, and they're going to be beautiful and terrific. And honestly, you can just leave them in there. They'll keep spreading out. When you harvest them, this is the root part. So this is the part of the ginger that you eat. Just cultivate it. Pull it out whenever you need it. But all of this is going to be going in my garden today. So I'm going to have ginger, you know, probably starting next year. I'll be able to harvest this, and I'll just have ginger whenever I want it. How awesome is that? Because ginger also not cheap, right? So what herbs should you be seeding right now? If you're starting an herb garden or just, you know, containers, and you want to seed some herbs, what are you going to start with? Some things do better in the springtime. Basil, definitely a springtime herb. It's not going to survive the winter cold. But most of your herbs are more wintertime or late fall or really, really early spring. So again, I'm in zone 9A, 8B. So for my zone, peoples, here we go. Cilantro, parsley, dill, oregano, thyme probably early spring, but definitely right now, oregano, mint does great in cooler weather. Cilantro, definitely a cool weather crop. So, you know, if you like cilantro, now's the time to plant it. The sad thing about cilantro is you really want it in the summertime when you have fresh tomatoes. And unfortunately, we really cannot grow cilantro and tomatoes in the same weather. Tomatoes like warmer weather, so I actually have some tomato plants I'm going to be starting right now in containers. I'm hoping that they do okay. It just depends on how cold our weather is going to get and how soon. So as the tomatoes die, the weather gets too cold for them, my cilantro is going to be flourishing. I have not found a good way to preserve cilantro. Most of my herbs, I can dehydrate them. They do great. Basil, oregano taste amazing, dill, parsley, all of those. Cilantro, once I dehydrate it, it just doesn't taste like anything anymore. Doesn't taste like cilantro. I have tried freezing it. Nope, same thing. I've even tried pureeing it and freezing it in oil, hoping that the oil, the fats would preserve some of that flavor. Nope, nada. So I'm going to try next spring, during the winter, I'm going to try freeze drying cilantro and see if I can preserve that flavor. Because unfortunately, otherwise, unless you can grow it fresh, at least to me, it just doesn't grow like, it doesn't taste like anything. So if some of you maybe have a little more expertise with preserving cilantro and doing it to where it retains that flavor, please, I'm begging you, please share that with me. I would love to know that. I just have not found a good way to do that right now. But most of these herbs just do terrific. They stay fresh during cold months, and you can have them fresh and then preserve them, dehydrate them. You can even dehydrate them in your oven. You can just let them air dry. Really, really simple to do. I'm not going to say it's easy because it is time consuming. Everything is, but it's not a complex project. So right now, if you're in my zone and you know you're trying to start planting those winter herbs, definitely cilantro, definitely parsley, definitely dill, definitely mint, oregano. I would strongly encourage you guys to do that. If you don't have a garden, find a flower pot, put some dirt in it, and start some herbs. Yeah, or maybe you just have a flower bed in the front of your house and you want to put some in your flower bed. I personally, you know, maybe it's just me, but I think they look beautiful in just mixed in with your flowers as a ground cover. Mint, it makes a beautiful ground cover. So does oregano. So I don't know, maybe put some in there with your flowers. You're watering and fertilizing those flowers all the time anyway. So maybe put some herbs in it and you can get, you know, some food out of your flower garden. When I plant my my onions, I don't plant them very deeply into the ground. I just want to make sure that the root part of it is in the ground and leave the top of it above the soil line. Now I have a lot of mulch here, so I kind of cover it back up with the mulch, but from this top is where the green stems are going to be growing, so I want to leave that exposed. And again, if you put this all the way into the ground, there's a possibility that it may rot depending on the moisture level. So I just leave it to where it can get some air, and it does totally fine. I did this last year. They were beautiful. And then the same thing with the garlic. This end right here, that's what's going to form the roots. This little point is where the stems are going to grow from, so you want this pointing upwards. So just put a little hole in the ground. Make sure that the root part is secure there, and then I'm just going to cover it up with a bunch of mulch. You can also use leaves to do this. That'll also keep that young plant protected in those cold winter months if it gets real cold. But even if the tops of it die down, my experience it'll just sprout back up in the springtime. As far as spacing, for both onions and garlic, I'm putting them 6 inches apart. You don't have to put them 6 inches apart. You could probably put them a little bit closer. 6 inches is really a good rule of thumb though, because it'll give them plenty of space for those bulbs to grow and spread out. But also I have drip tape irrigation in here, and the drippers are spaced 6 inches apart. So I am putting 1 bulb per dripper head. So to transplant these into my front garden, I'm pruning all of the oregano and all of the mint. I'm going to just cut it pretty close to the ground, just a couple of inches maybe high. And then I'm going to dump everything, like this whole pot, onto a tarp. Just pick up the plant and the roots. Those will get transported. The soil that's in here, I'm going to go ahead and just refertilize it with some compost. I'm going to put it back in here, and this is where I'm going to be planting my tomatoes. Keep in mind too that herbs really love to be pruned. So if you have these in containers, if you're growing them in containers or even in your garden, you want to prune them every so often. They get to where they're just like langy and tall, and then they start dying back. So you want to prune them and give these new little buds that are forming there a chance to grow, and they'll really do a lot better for you if you do that. They'll get a lot healthier, and those leaves will be a lot thicker. Obviously, I have not been doing a good job pruning mine. Also, when you're doing that, this may also be a good time to thin them out. Like I said, some herbs, like this is my mint, and it just like, it spreads out. This started out as just a couple of little plants, and it filled this pot up. So as you're doing that, as you're thinning it out, maybe pull some of those roots out, and this is a good time to share those with a friend. So you can always take those roots and put them in a different container and repot them, or if you're trying to grow it somewhere else, then transplant them somewhere else. But just keep that in mind, that at some point you want to come in here and do some really good pruning and thinning out, because they really will take over. This is why it's a good idea to have an herb garden, because then they can spread out as much as they want to without taking over all of your other garden plants. So at that end of this garden bed, I have some peppermint, and this is where I'm going to be planting my oregano right here. At the other end of the garden bed is where I'm going to be planting the chocolate mint. It's another mint variety, and it smells heavenly. So I'll just let these 3 very invasive herbs kind of take over and make this place their own. So I'm going to dig just a little bit into this soil, and I have some compost here that I'm going to be adding to it, just to give this location a little more oomph. And this is compost that we made here on our property here in the garden, so it's really good, rich compost. I know that I'm feeding my plants, right? And as I'm digging this dirt out, I want to try to not mix it in with my mulch a lot. If you mix wood chips in with your soil, those wood chips are going to absorb all of the nutrients out of the soil. Eventually wood chips will decompose, but while they're doing that, they're going to soak up all of the nitrogen and take that away from your plants. So be careful if you have mulch wood chips in your garden like I do. You want to make sure that you move that out of the way, put your plants straight in the soil, and then put the mulch back around it.